I thought I was a doctor saving lives, but one accidental bag swap left me holding an illegal weapon and facing a grave accusation. Now I'm the prime target of an organized scheme, and the internal security check is determined to lock me away for dozens of years. I've spent the last 12 years of my life listening to the rhythmic thumping of human hearts, trying to decipher the secrets they hide behind ribs and muscle. As a senior cardiologist at one of the busiest city hospitals, my life is measured in beats per minute and the sharp hiss of oxygen tanks. But that night, as I stepped off the number 42 bus, my own heart was doing something no textbook could explain. It was heavy, lagging with a fatigue that seeped into my very bones. I had just finished a 36-hour double shift, a marathon of emergency consults and a grueling 6-hour valve replacement that had tested every ounce of my steady-handed resolve. The city was draped in a thick, suffocating fog, the kind that turns street lamps into ghostly orbs and muffles the sound of distant sirens. I stood on the cracked pavement of the bus stop, shivering as the damp air bit through my thin coat. It wasn't until the bus had already wheezed its way 3 blocks down the street, its taillights bleeding into the mist, that I felt the sudden sickening lightness on my shoulder. My bag, my worn black leather satchel, the one my father had given me when I graduated med school, was gone. It wasn't just the bag. Inside were my house keys, my wallet, and most importantly, a decrypted tablet containing 3 years of research on a new cardiac bypass technique that was supposed to be my legacy. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. I took a step toward the receding bus, my hand instinctively reaching out as if I could pull it back by sheer will, but it was useless. I was stranded, exhausted, and effectively erased from my own life. I sank onto the cold metal bench of the bus stop, burying my face in my hands. The silence of the deserted street felt like a physical weight. That's when I heard it. The soft, rhythmic scuff of shoes on pavement. I looked up, my pulse quickening. Emerging from the shadows behind the bus shelter was an elderly woman. She was small, hunched under a heavy wool coat that looked older than I was, with a headscarf tied tightly under her chin. Her face was a map of deep-set wrinkles, but her eyes, even in the dim light, were startlingly bright. In her withered hands she held a black leather bag. "You dropped this, dear," she said, her voice a raspy whisper that sent an inexplicable chill down my spine. "It's a heavy burden for such young shoulders to carry." Relief flooded me so intensely I almost burst into tears. I stood up, my legs shaking. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I didn't even realize. I was so tired, I reached out to take the bag, my fingers brushing her cold, papery skin. She didn't let go immediately. She held the strap for a second longer than necessary, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that felt like a warning. "Be careful, Elena," she murmured. I froze. "How do you know my name?" But she was already turning away, her small frame dissolving back into the swirling gray fog. I stood there, stunned, clutching the leather bag to my chest. My mind raced. Maybe she'd seen my ID. Maybe she was a regular at the hospital. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of my own exhaustion. I just needed to get home. I reached into the side pocket of the bag to pull out my keys, but my fingers met something unfamiliar. The texture was wrong. Instead of the smooth metal of my keychain, I felt something cold, heavy, and metallic. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled the bag under the flickering light of the street lamp and unzipped the main compartment. My breath hitched. This wasn't my bag. It looked identical from the outside, the same scuffed leather, the same silver buckle, but the contents were a nightmare. Inside, there were several thick bundles wrapped in plastic, filled with a fine gray prohibited substance. Tucked beside them was a heavy, cold object, unmistakably an illegal weapon. My hands began to shake violently. As I moved the strap, a small laminated card fell out and landed face up on the wet pavement. I looked down and felt the world tilt on its axis. It was an ID badge, but it wasn't mine. It featured a photo of a man I didn't recognize, and underneath, in bold red letters, was a stamp I had only ever seen in news reports. subject of internal security investigation, grave accusation. Before I could even process the horror in my hands, a pair of blinding headlights cut through the fog, pinning me like a moth to a flame. A dark, unmarked SUV screeched to a halt just feet away from me. Doors flew open and 3 men in dark tactical gear stepped out, their faces obscured. One of them pointed a finger directly at the bag I was clutching. "Don't move!" he barked, his voice amplified by the silence of the night. "You're under arrest for involvement in an organized scheme. Drop the bag and put your hands where we can see them." The world didn't just tilt. It shattered. I felt the cold bite of metal restraints around my wrists before I could even register the movement of the men in tactical gear. The bag, the one filled with those terrifying bundles and the illegal weapon, was ripped from my grasp with a violence that left my shoulders aching. I tried to scream, to tell them that this was a mistake, that I was a cardiologist, a healer, not a criminal. But the words were swallowed by the roar of the SUV's engine as I was shoved into the back seat, pinned between 2 hulking figures whose faces were masks of stone. "Wait, please," I finally managed to gasp, my voice cracking with terror. "Check my pockets. My hospital ID is in my coat. I'm Dr. Elena Vance. I just finished a shift at the General. That old woman at the stop, she gave me that bag. I thought it was mine." The man in the front seat, a sharp-featured individual with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow, didn't even turn around. He was busy leafing through the contents of the satchel. "Save it for the interrogation, doctor," he said, his voice dripping with a cold, professional disdain. "We've been tracking this organized scheme for months. The distraught doctor act is a bit cliché, don't you think? You were seen receiving the package. You're holding a weapon and enough prohibited substances to fuel a small army of radicals. That's a grave accusation you're facing, enough to put you away for dozens of years." "You don't understand," I sobbed, the adrenaline finally giving way to a paralyzing dread. The bags. They looked exactly the same. My research. My tablet is in the other one. "Please, you have to find the bus. My life is in that bag." The man with the scar finally turned, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. "Your life? Or the data you were supposed to deliver? We know all about your research, Elena. We know what that bypass technique is really for." I went cold. My research was about saving lives, about finding a way to repair cardiac tissue that had been deemed beyond help. What could he possibly mean? The SUV sped through the deserted, fog-slicked streets, bypassing the Central Police Precinct and heading instead toward the industrial district, where the warehouses stood like rotting giants against the dark sky. This wasn't a standard arrest. There were no sirens, no radio chatter, just the heavy, oppressive silence of a specialized unit. We pulled into a cavernous, dimly lit garage. I was hauled out of the vehicle and marched down a series of concrete corridors that smelled of damp earth and stale cigarettes. They threw me into a small room with nothing but a metal table and 2 chairs. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing through every possible explanation. Was this a dream? A hallucination brought on by extreme sleep deprivation? Finally, the door creaked open. It wasn't the man with the scar who entered, but the small, hunched figure of the old woman from the bus stop. She wasn't wearing the headscarf anymore. Her gray hair was pulled back into a sharp, efficient bun, and her posture was no longer stooped. She walked with the grace of a predator. "You're quite a difficult woman to protect, Elena," she said, her voice no longer raspy, but smooth and authoritative. She sat down across from me and placed a familiar black leather bag on the table. My bag. You set me up," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Why? Who are you?" She smiled, a thin, mirthless line. "I didn't set you up. I saved you. The men who took you are part of a secret network, a group that has been waiting for your research to be completed. They don't want to save hearts, Elena. They want to know how to stop them, instantly, silently, and without leaving a single trace of a prohibited substance in the bloodstream. They've been watching you for years." She reached into the bag. my bag, and pulled out the tablet. But instead of turning it on, she pressed a hidden seam on the side of the device. The screen didn't glow. Instead, the back of the tablet popped open, revealing a small, glowing blue vial nestled inside the circuitry. "Your father didn't give you this bag because he was proud of your graduation," she said, her eyes locked on mine. "He gave it to you because he knew this day would come. He knew that the internal security check would eventually find his greatest invention." I stared at the vial, my breath hitching. My father was a surgeon. He died in an accident 10 years ago. The woman leaned forward, the flickering light making her look ancient once more. "Is that what they told you? Elena, look at the ID card you found in the other bag. Really look at it." With trembling hands, I reached into my coat pocket. I had tucked the laminated card there in the chaos. I pulled it out and looked at the photo of the man facing the grave accusation. I had thought he was a stranger, but now, under the harsh light of the interrogation room, the features began to shift in my mind. The eyes, the shape of the jaw. It was an older version of the man in the photos on my mantelpiece. "That's impossible," I breathed. "He's not dead, Elena," the woman whispered, "and he's the one who sent those men to the bus stop tonight. But they aren't here to arrest you. They're here to make sure you never leave this building alive." At that exact moment, the heavy steel door behind her began to buckle, the sound of a rhythmic mechanical pounding echoing through the room. Someone was trying to break in, and they weren't using a key. The door didn't just open, it exploded inward with a deafening crack of splintering steel and screeching hinges. I dove behind the metal table, my hands over my head, as the room filled with the acrid scent of ozone and dust. Through the haze, I saw the man with the scar step over the debris, his illegal weapon raised, followed by two others. They didn't look like police. They didn't look like any government agency I knew. They looked like predators who had finally cornered their prey. "Enough games, Martha," the man with the scar growled, his gaze shifting from the old woman to the bag on the table. "The organized scheme doesn't have time for your theatrics. The doctor is coming with us, and so is the bypass data. Her father is waiting." Martha stood her ground, her small frame surprisingly steady despite the weapons pointed at her chest. "He's not waiting as a father, Victor. He's waiting as a ghost who sold his soul to radicals. You tell him that the internal security check has already flagged every account, every safe house, and every operative in this city." My head was spinning. My father, the man I had mourned for a decade, was alive and leading a network of criminals? The research I had poured my soul into was being weaponized? I looked at the blue vial in my hand, the one Martha had pulled from the hidden compartment of my tablet. As a cardiologist, I understood the chemistry of the heart better than anyone. If this was what she said it was, a cardiac disruptor, it was the ultimate untraceable assassination tool. It didn't just stop a heart. It mimicked a natural failure so perfectly that no autopsy could detect the interference. "Give it to me, Elena," Victor said, stepping closer. "Your father did this for you, to build a world where we control the rhythm of power. Don't let his years of sacrifice be for nothing." "Sacrifice?" I whispered, standing up slowly. My fear was being replaced by a cold, clinical anger. He let me believe he was dead. He let me build a tool for murder while I thought I was saving lives. That's not a father. That's a monster. "Last warning, doctor," Victor sneered, leveling the weapon at my head. I looked at Martha. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod. I knew what I had to do. My hands, the hands that had performed a 6-hour valve replacement just yesterday, didn't shake. I held the blue vial over the hard concrete floor. "As a doctor, I took an oath to do no harm," I said, my voice echoing in the small room. "But I also know exactly what happens when the heart stops. This substance is volatile, isn't it? If I drop this, the aerosolized vapor will fill this room in seconds. None of us are wearing masks. In 3 minutes, our heart rates will drop to 0. No struggle, no pain, just silence." Victor hesitated. He was a killer, but he wasn't a martyr. "You're bluffing. You'd die too." "I've spent the last 36 hours surrounded by death, Victor," I replied, my thumb hovering over the seal of the vial. "I'm tired, are you?" The tension in the room was a physical weight. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the flickering of the overhead bulb. Then the ceiling seemed to groan. High-pitched whistles pierced the air, the sound of tactical gas canisters. Suddenly, the walls of the garage didn't just echo. They shook with the force of a full-scale tactical entry. "Internal security, drop your weapons!" a voice boomed from the rafters. Flashbangs detonated, white light washing out the world. I felt Martha grab me, pulling me toward a hidden service door behind the table. Chaos erupted, the rhythmic thud of non-lethal rounds, the shouting of men being apprehended, and the heavy boots of the internal verification service swarming the facility. When the smoke finally cleared, I was sitting in the back of an ambulance draped in a thermal blanket. The fog outside was lifting, revealing the first pale streaks of dawn. Martha was there, speaking quietly to a man in a sharp suit, a real representative of the internal security check. Victor and his team were being loaded into a separate van, bound for a specialized facility where they would face a huge term, decades behind bars for their involvement in the organized scheme. Martha walked over to me, handing me a paper cup of bitter hospital coffee. "It's over, Elena. The data has been secured and the network is being dismantled from the top down." "And my father?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "He was caught trying to cross the border an hour ago. He'll never see the light of day again. He faces a grave accusation that no amount of influence can erase." I looked down at my hands. They were still steady. I had lost a father for the second time, but for the first time in my life, I truly knew who I was. I wasn't just a pawn in a game of radicals. I was a healer. I reached into my pocket and found my actual bag's keychain, the one with the small silver heart my mother had given me. I stood up, breathing in the cold, clean morning air. I had a shift starting in 4 hours, and there were people at the hospital who needed their hearts mended. As I walked away from the industrial district, I didn't look back. The bus would be coming soon, and this time I wouldn't leave anything behind.